Hi class, this is Dr. Karsten, and today we are doing lesson 23 from Module 5, Grade 4, Engaged New York Math. And in today's lesson, we are going to be adding and multiplying unit fractions to build fractions greater than 1. So let's just jump right in. Now this might look familiar. In class, a lot of times I'll say to you, let's say I'm adding 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3, and what I'll often say is, how many times did I add 3? And then you always tell me, oh, you added it 4 times. And then we always say, so we could also say 4 times 3. So again, if I added 3, 1, 2, 3, 4 times, I could just say 4 times 3. 3 happened 4 times, and we would get our answer of 12. So similarly, let's say that we started with 6 times 2. Another way for us to write that would be to add 2, because multiplication is just repeated addition. We could take and add 2 6 times. So 6 times 2 is just adding 2 6 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 times 2 is the same thing as 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. And no matter how we do it, we are going to get 12. Now, we can do the same thing with fractions. So now let's take 6. Oh, you know what? I wanted to show you something else with that. I wanted to show you how to model that on a number line. So I apologize. So since we are counting by 2's in a sense, so let's do a number line for this. So I'm going to start with 0. And let me put in, we have 1. I'm going to really emphasize 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So now if I wanted to model 6 times 2 is 12, or in other words, 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2, or 6 2's, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show that with my hops. I'm going to hop 2 each time. So this is going to be 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. In other words, 6 times 2. And 6 times 2 is 12, and we can go ahead and write that. So now we've modeled this here. So similar to how we can model 6 times 2, let's go ahead and let's model 6 times 1/2. So I'm going to slide this up a little bit for us so we have some workspace. And I'm laughing just because the puppy is playing with his squeaky toy right now. Usually he's asleep by now. Okay, so let's do 6 times, I apologize for the noise, 6 times 1/2. So if I'm doing 6 times 1/2, again, another way to write that is to say it's going to be 1/2 plus 1/2 plus 1/2 6 times. So let's go ahead and do that. So I could say it's 1/2 plus 1/2 plus 1/2 plus 1/2 plus 1/2 plus 1/2. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 halves. But now what I want you to think about is, up here, we were counting by 2's in the other problem, but here, what am I going to get for my answer? Well, I have 6 halves is one way to think of it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have 6 halves, because remember when we add, we just keep our denominator. We're saying that we have 1 of those pieces, 2 of those size pieces, 3 of those pieces, 4, 5, 6 of those pieces. So we have 6 pieces, and they are each halves. But another way for us to think about that is to think about how many wholes do we have? Because I know that 2 halves make 1 whole. Think about it. If I take an apple and I cut it in half, that whole apple, if I take those 2 halves and put it back together, I get 1 whole again. So I could think about it as being like 1 whole here, 1 whole here, and 1 whole here, or 1, 2, 3 wholes. Let's model that. Let's try and show that on a number line. And then we're going to work on grouping it to kind of really make it make sense. So I'm going to start with 0, And we know that ultimately the place that I want to end up is 6 halves. And I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to write this. I'm going to mark off all my halves. So here I have 1 half. Here I have 2 halves. Here I have 3 halves. Here I have 4 halves, 5 halves, 6 halves, 7 halves, and I've already gone past my 6 halves, so I'm already good on how far I have to go. I'm going to slide this up a little bit so we have our workspace. So let's go ahead and let's model all these halves. So we have 6 halves. So we go 1, 2 halves, 3 halves, 4 halves, 5 halves, 6 halves. And this is where I'm going to end right here. And the way to write that is then 6 times 1 half is equal to 6 halves. But what is that really equal to in wholes? Well, that's really equal to 1 whole here, another whole here, and another whole here. Another way to do that is, remember, we can think about how many how many 2 halves, I'm sorry, that just sounds really awkward when I say it, but how many holes am I pulling out? And what we know is that 1 whole is equal to 2 halves. And I just want to remind you of that. How could I pull that out? Well, another way of doing that, instead of doing what we've been doing the last few days where we have said, oh, well, we have 6 halves and let's kind of pull out all our halves. So instead of doing it like this, where I say I have 2 here, another 2 here, and another 2 there, we're going to work on grouping it. So we're going to kind of take this, but I'm going to rewrite it really quickly. And then I want us to kind of group the halves. So I guess we can just do it right there and save some time. I want to group my halves into wholes. So again, remember what I said before. If I take an apple and cut it in half, put it back together, those 2 halves make up 1 whole. So 2 halves are going to make up 1 whole for us. And then we can do it again here. 2 halves make up a whole, and we can do it again here. 2 halves made up a whole. Another way of looking at that is that I could say that I have 3 times 2 halves. How could I write that? Well, I could say 3 times 2 halves. And what we're really doing right now is we're just kind of playing with fractions. And we're looking at different ways of grouping them to help us really understand them. We're going to do a few more of these, so if you're feeling a little confused, keep in mind that this is just a lesson really that's focusing on helping us to understand how fractions are and to work with units and things like that. So don't get stressed out if you're like, why on earth are we doing this? It's okay, you'll understand more in a little while, and this is not going to be like a crazy lesson. You're going to be fine. All right, so we have 3 times 2 halves. And that's what I just did here. I did 3 times. I did 2 halves together. I grouped them. And so that's, again, going to be equal to 6 halves. Or, instead of saying 6 halves, what I could have said was that I have 3 wholes. I could have said, well, this makes 1 whole, this makes 1 whole, and this makes 1 whole. So what I could have done was I could have said, well, that's equal to 3. Because remember, 2 halves is just 1. So it's really 3 times 1. And this is what we're going to be doing right now, is we are going to be grouping our fractions into ones or into units. Remember that units are always ones. When we're using a place value table, we can talk about the ones, but we could also call it the units. Units are ones. So that's what we're going to be working with today. So let's keep going and let's do another example. I'm just thinking about whether I want to do one more thing here. But I think that we've pretty much shown it, that 6 times 1 half would be the same as 3 times 2 halves, and that we're going to get the same answer. So now what I want us to do is I want us to do 6 times 1 half in unit form. So, so let me give us a clean piece of paper to work on. Okay. So again, now what I want to do is I want to do 6 times 1 half in unit form. So what we figured out already was that 2 halves is equal to 1, and we really want to model that. So I'm going to draw a number line here. And I'm going to start with 0. And I'm going to mark off the halves just because I like for us to see it. So I'm going to mark that off. But then I'm going to go ahead and really emphasize the whole. So there's another half, but here's another whole. So I have one whole, two wholes. So I'm showing my units is what I'm doing. And if I wanted to do 6 times 1/2 in unit form, what I'm doing is I'm going to show that, well, for every 2 halves I get a whole. So here I'd have 2, and then I'm going to have 4, so that's 4 halves. And then here I have 6 halves. But what I did was I modeled it by grouping them together, just like how we grouped them together before with the parentheses. And so what I ended up with was 3 groups of 2 halves. So here's one group with 2 halves, another group with 2 halves, and another group with 2 halves. So I have 3 groups of 2 halves. So I just want to make sure that I'm making sure I'm not missing anything. I wrote down a few questions that I wanted to make sure I covered. But I think we're good with this. So again, don't panic. I know it's a little weird, but the goal today is to take whatever your fraction is and turn it into units. And units are just ones. So let's do another one. Let's say that we had 10 times 1/5. And I'm going to slide the paper up, don't worry. So let's say that I have 10 times 1/5. Look at what your units are here, or what your from your fraction. It's 5. So how many would make one whole? Well, I know that 5/5 is equal to 1 whole. So what I want to be doing here is I want to be working with groups of 5/5. That's what I want to be grouping them as together. So let's now do the same thing that we did up top with halves, but let's do it with fifths. Now remember, I need to have 10 fifths in total. So let me model that. So I'm going to have a 0, and then I'm going to have my 1, and how many fifths make 1? Well, we already said 5 fifths make 1. So what I need to do is I need to model those in there. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but I don't want to model that. I want to say, well, look, I'm jumping 5 fifths gets me to the 1. And how many would get me to the 2? Well, I need another 5 fifths. Or now I've done 5 fifths plus another 5 fifths, so I've done 10 fifths. So another way of thinking of 2 is that this would also be 10 fifths. So we just modeled hopping by units. Instead of hopping by fifths, we're kind of going ahead and we're saying, oh, well, 5 of them make up one whole unit. So another way now to write this is to say that, that 10 times 1/5 is equal to 2 times 5 fifths, or 2. So because we did 5 fifths and another 5 fifths, so we did it 2 times, we did 5 fifths. Versus, say, doing 1/5, 2 fifths, 3 fifths, 4 fifths, 5 fifths, 6 fifths, 7 fifths, 8 fifths, 9 fifths, 10 fifths. Okay. Now, here's the thing. Right now, we've been winding up with whole numbers. We got a 2 here. When we did 6 times 1/2, we got a 3. Sometimes we are going to end up with a mixed number instead. So let's do an example like that, just so that you see it one more time. So let's say that I was doing 9 times 1/4. Well, I know that 4 fourths is equal to 1, so I know that I'm going to be counting by fourths, but I'm going to have 4 fourths, so I'm going to be skipping up to those units again, to 1 and 2 and things like that. But how many groups of 4 fourths do I have in 9? Just take a second and think about that. How many groups of 4 fourths are there in 9? Well, let's model it and let's find out. Let's see what we end up with. So I'm going to go ahead and again draw my number line. I'm going to start at 0, but now between 0 and 1, I'm going to have fourths. So I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 to get to this 1. And then the same thing will happen to get to 2. I'm going to have to go ahead and put in 1, 2, 3, 4. That gets me to 2. And now I happen to know that we're going to go bigger, so I'm going to go ahead and put my 3 over here. But I'm not going to go ahead and write it. I'm just going to put those fourths in to help us out. And let's see what happens. So remember, my goal is to have 9 fourths, right? Because I'm doing 1/4 9 times, or 9 fourths. But I want to do them in groups of 4. So I've gone 4. Now I'm going to go another 4, which means I've gone a total of 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, so that's 8. Well, that means I only have 1/4 left, so I'm just going to hop to right here. So what you can see is that I went 1, 2, and a 4. So my answer is 2 1/4, or 9 fourths. So there's 2 different ways that I can write it. I can show that here that we went 4 fourths, and here that we went another 4 fourths, and then here we went 1/4. And then what I can show is that it's 2 1/4, or 9 fourths. So we went 2 1/4, or 9 fourths. So let's write that in a number sentence. So I would say that 9 times 1/4 is equal to 2 times 4 fourths plus 1/4. So how did I get that? What did I just do? Well, instead of saying 1/4 9 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, we could also say that you're doing 2 times 4 fourths. Here's 1 4 fourths. Here's another 4 fourths. And remember, this is just 1. So 2 times 1 is equal to 2. But then we had to add on that 4. He couldn't just be, included in the multiplication. It wasn't going to work because we're multiplying again, or we're adding by units. We're counting by units. So 1, 2 1/4, or 2 1/4. And we can write that also and say it's 2 plus 1/4, because that's where we got the 2 from. And then put it together, 2 1/4. And I'll slide it over for us so you can see what I just wrote. Okay. So I hope that this is starting to make a little bit of sense what we're doing, and that we're just trying to group our fractions into whole units, into, ones and twos and threes. I'm okay with you still saying, well, I know, let me show you one more thing. I'm okay with you if you really feel like you understand and say, well, 9 times 1/4 is equal to 9 fourths. Oops, sorry. And then if you can pull out all your wholes out of that. Now, instead of doing we're going to be moving forward with this. But again, the way we've been doing it is we were doing number bonds, where we take out the 4 fourths and the 4 fourths. But in this case, you would still have 1/4. So I'd have 1, 2, and a 4th. This is another way of thinking about it, but we really want to start moving more into this way of thinking about it. Okay, so let's kind of jump into this problem set. Let's jump into the problem set, and let's do a couple problems here together, and then I'll let you finish it out on your own. So let's take a look at 1A. So for 1A, it says, count by 1/3. Start at 0/3, end at 6/3. And that's pretty easy. We're just going to start counting by 1/3. So we have 0/3, 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, and I know that 3/3 is equal to 1, so I'm going to write that on the bottom. 4/3, 5/3, 6/3, and I know that that's 2, because every 3/3 that I go, I have gone up 1 whole. So here we had 1 and 2. And that's as far as I had to go, right? And these are the important ones, because we have 3/3 and 6/3, and those are our whole numbers right there. So I'm going to let you count by halves. I'm just going to start you off by saying you're going to start with 0 halves, and that you want to end at 8 halves. But I want you to also point out whenever you reach a whole number. So you know what? I'm going to start you off. So we have 1 half, 2 halves, and when I get to 2 halves, I know that I have 1 whole. Remember, 2 halves makes 1 whole. Okay, so I'm going to let you finish this one out. You have to get to 8 halves. Let's take a look at this one now. It says, use parentheses to show how to make ones in the following number sentence. Well, since they're fourths, I know that 4/4 is equal to 1 whole. So that's what I'm going to be grouping them as. I'm going to take 4/4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I know that that's 1 whole. I'm going to do the same thing here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to do it here again. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now you can see I made 1 whole, another whole, and a third whole. So 1, 2, 3. And that's how they got that 3 there. Okay, so now they've given us this first one. And let me just take a sneak peek at the next page really quick. I was looking at these earlier. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's take a look at what they did. So here it says, multiply as shown, draw a number line to support your answer. So again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to show those units, those ones. So since it was being multiplied by 1/3, we know for this one that 3/3 is equal to 1. And that's why they were hopping 1, 2, 3/3, but they were doing it in one big jump. So let's try to do the same thing down here. So for this one, we're doing 6, but we're 6 times 1/2. So let me draw the number line. I'm going to have my 0. And then I want to go ahead and put my halves in, but here's going to be a whole, and then a half. So it's a half plus another half is a whole, plus a half plus another half is another whole, plus a half plus another half is a whole, and then we continue to 4 and on. So now when I'm dealing with halves, oh my goodness, I am so sorry. I just realized that I completely left you out of this. Sorry guys. So let me go back really quick and take a look at this, and you can see again they're multiplying by thirds, and so it's a third. I'm not going to go back and redo the whole lesson, I'm sorry, but I will put a note in there to let you know that it goes off camera in number 3, that I do go back to it, and that you'll see it. So I'm so sorry. But again, here, since this was thirds, what I showed you was 3/3 is equal to 1, and that's why they were hopping by wholes here. They would hop 1, 2, 3, but instead of hopping 1, 2, 3, they said, well, I know 3/3 is 1 whole, so boom. And then another 3 times 1/3, boom. And that's how they did this one. So now for this one, what I went ahead and did, and I said, well, I'm counting by halves, so I went ahead and I made a number line. And I showed my halves, 1/2, 2 halves, 3 halves, 4 halves, 5 halves, 6 halves, 7 halves, 8 halves. But what I did was I didn't write in all those halves. I just put in my wholes, and I just showed where those halves were. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we are going to do our halves, but we're only going to hop like this. We're going to hop 1 whole. So I've gone 2. Now I've gone 4. And now I've gone 6. So what we just did was we went 6 halves, but we did it at 2 halves at a time because 2 halves is equal to 1 whole. So we have 1, 2, 3. Because we want to count by units if we can. We're starting to learn how to group these fractions to make the units. So what I would have here is, again, I would have 2 times a half, and then we did the same thing here. We did 2 times a half, because there's 2 halves in here. And then we did this again, 2 times a half. Okay, don't let this panic you again. This is not, the end all of where we're trying to end up. It's just something that we're working on. So now let me write this with an equation. So what I could say is that 6 times 1/2, so I'm just showing what I started with, is equal to 3 times 2 halves, because this is 2 halves, this is 2 halves, and this is 2 halves. So it's going to be 3 times 2 halves, which is also just equal to 3, because that's where we ended up. I'm going to let you guys try this one on your own. So you're going to finish out 1B. You're going to try the next one on your own, and just do your best. If you're really stuck, you can go ahead and do 6 times 1/2 and get 6 halves, and then decompose that into wholes. But I really want you to start trying to feel like you can show this a little bit. Okay, so we have another page here. Now for number 4, we're doing the same thing. The difference is that we are going to end up with a mixed number instead of ending up with a whole number. So let's go ahead and take a peek at that and see if we can figure these out. So I want to go ahead and just jump into the next problem instead of going through the one that they do, because you know that That's my preference when we're doing this, is to jump into a brand new one for you. So here it's saying 7 copies of a half. So what they're saying is 7 times a half. They're saying it's 1/2 7 times. When you see the word copies, it's like times. So let me just say that. And I feel like we keep doing halves, but what this would be is just 7 times 1/2. I feel like we've done a whole bunch of these. Let's go ahead and do these fourths here instead. So I'm going to do 10 times 1/4. So remember, what I really want to remember for this is that 4/4 is equal to 1 whole. So I don't have to do 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. Instead, can't I count by 4/4? Well, let's try it. Let's go ahead and draw a number line. Just trying to think about where I want to put it to leave a little room. Okay, so we always start in 0. And then to get to 1, remember what I'm going to have to do is all these fourths. And then that gets me to 1. And we've been doing dots instead of the lines. Let me do that. And then to get to 2, I have to do this. Hard to break old habits. So now, look, I've done 4, 8. So I definitely have to go bigger. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the next one. Well, that gets me to 12/4. That's going to be too big because, look, I have 4/4, 8/4, 12/4. That's getting me way too big. I just need to go to 10/4, which is going to land me right about here. So let's show this. So here I've gone 4 times a 4. Because see, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I just did 4 1/4 hops, or 1. Let's do the same thing here. So 4 times 1/4. So this was 1. This gets me to 2. So what I've done now is I've done a total of 8/4. So now I just need to do 2 more. So I'm going to show that like this and say 2/4. So what did we just do here? We did 4 times 1/4, and again 4 times 1/4, or we did it 2 times. And again, each one of these is 4/4. This is another way of thinking about that because we have 4/4 in there. So let's write this mathematically now. Oh, and I probably should have gone ahead and written here. Well, you can see it's 2 and 2/4. So let's go ahead and do this. So we do 10 times 1/4 is equal to doing these 2 hops. So 2 times, and this is 4/4 and 4/4, plus this other 2/4. So all we're doing is we're just showing that we did these hops 2 times. We hopped 4/4 and 4/4 again. So we did 4/4 2 times. 1 time, 2 times, and then we're modeling another 2/4. And we're saying that that's equal to 2 and 2/4, because it's 2 and 2/4. Okay, don't panic. Do your best. I want you to try. I'm going to write it down. I'll post it, but you're going to do this one, you're going to do this one, so you're going to do B and D in number 4, and then in, what was the one we were doing before that, 3, I think you don't have a lot of work to do there, so don't stress. I'll post it for you. I know this lesson's probably looking a little weird, but again, the idea is, you're going to do C from 3, and you're going to finish out 2, so it's not a lot of questions. I really don't want you guys panicking over this. A lot of the other lessons were a lot more straightforward. This one, it's learning how to group it into units, and it's really not, we're trying to learn how to group things into units and work with it that way instead of dealing with all the fourths. It's going to help us in the future when we are decomposing numbers and turning them into mixed numbers and things like that. So don't stress, it's going to be fine, and I will see you, and you know what, come to our Google Meets and we'll explain it there more. All right, have a great evening.